The FBI called me at 7:13 p.m. while I was finishing up a client's financial report. They said my wife was in custody, found in a locked apartment, with a dead man. I'm Graham. And up until that call, I thought my life was ordinary, predictable, even. But what I discovered that night wasn't just an affair. It was betrayal layered in secrets, manipulation, and something much darker than I imagined. What would you do if the person you trusted most was suddenly the center of an FBI investigation? Was she a victim, or part of the plan? Tell me in the comments, do you believe love can survive a secret like this? FBI called me at 7:13 p.m. on a Tuesday. Elise was in handcuffs. And I had no idea why. The last rays of Portland's gray dusk slipped behind the high-rise towers, casting long shadows across Graham's office. Raindrops tapped gently against the windows of the 15th floor, blurring the skyline like a watercolor left in the sink. He had just finished cross-checking a quarterly spreadsheet when the phone rang, a landline he rarely used, except for official business. "This is Mr. Ellison," he said, standing to stretch. The voice on the other end was crisp, precise. "Mr. Graham Ellison, sir. This is Special Agent Riley Tran with the FBI. We need you to come with us to 416, Northwest 13th Avenue. It's regarding your wife." "My wife?" Graham repeated, frowning. "Is she okay?" "We'll explain everything at the scene. Please bring identification." That was all. No emotion. Just coordinates and urgency. Graham grabbed his coat, heart pounding. The rain had picked up, a quiet fury drumming against the glass as he descended to the parking garage. The address was familiar. Too familiar. Apartment 2B, Pearl District. Elisa's old place. They'd moved her out years ago after their wedding. Why would she be back there now? When he arrived, red and blue lights pulsed against the damp pavement. A uniformed officer stopped him at the cordon, checked his ID, and waved him through. The hallway inside smelled faintly of wood polish and cigarette smoke. The elevator was out, so he took the stairs two at a time, his mind racing. At the door to 2B, the scene unfolded like a photograph in slow motion. Elise stood near the entrance, wrists cuffed behind her back, her gray sweater hanging loosely from her shoulders. Her feet were bare, her face pale, as if she'd been caught in a snowstorm. Her eyes met Graham's, wide and unreadable. She didn't say a word. Inside the apartment, it was dim. Warm yellow light from an overhead fixture cast long shadows across the floorboards. Two agents were cataloging evidence. The air was still, heavy. There was a faint scent of cologne mixed with blood. Then Graham saw him. A man, mid-40s, stocky build, lay face up on the bedroom carpet, unmoving. A crimson halo pooled beneath his head. A handgun sat on the nightstand beside a photograph. Graham's stomach dropped. The photograph was of Elise and the man. Smiling. Close. Next to it, a worn leather notebook lay open on the dresser. He didn't recognize the man. Not a coworker. Not a friend. Agent Tran motioned to him. "Mr. Ellison, we understand this is a lot. We'll need a statement. Right now, we're still processing the scene." "What happened?" Graham asked, barely above a whisper. "We're working on it. There are signs this was more than a break-in. And this," she gestured toward the notebook, "this may involve you directly." She handed it to him, gloves on. Graham hesitated, then took it. The handwriting was unmistakably Elisa's. He flipped through pages of notes. Grocery lists. Quick thoughts. Then a line jumped out, circled twice in red ink. "He said if I didn't help him, you'd lose everything." Graham's breath caught in his throat. He turned the page. More scrawl, more confusion, none of it immediately clear. His mind reached backward. Was Elise in some kind of trouble? Debt? Blackmail? "Sir," the agent said again, "we need you to come with us." He looked back at Elise. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to speak. But nothing came. She just stood there, cuffed, silent, soaked in the hum of unanswered questions. Graham followed the agents into the hallway, the rain still drumming against the windows like a slow metronome, each drop marking the moment his world had started to tilt. "It's not what you think," Elise whispered. I wasn't sure what to think anymore. The holding room at the Portland FBI field office was colder than it looked. Fluorescent lights hummed softly above, bouncing off the dull beige walls like unwelcome thoughts. Graham sat across from Agent Riley Tran at a plain steel table, the kind built for utility, not comfort. A digital clock on the wall blinked 9:24 p.m. in stark red digits. Agent Tran had just finished explaining the little she could legally share. The man in the apartment, Nick Brennan, was a commercial photographer with contracts across the Pacific Northwest, fashion shoots, ad campaigns, nothing violent or political. No known criminal ties, but there were ongoing investigations. No mention of why Elise was with him. Or why there was a gun. Or why it was Graham's gun. "She refused a lawyer," Tran said, watching Graham carefully. "Said you'd understand." Graham didn't respond right away. He stared at the folder on the table that Tran hadn't opened. The one that probably held photos of the scene, autopsy notes, or something worse. Understand? Elise thought he'd understand this. Tran's tone softened, maybe seeing the doubt creeping in. Sometimes people get caught in situations they didn't create. But Mr. Ellison, sometimes they're not who we think they are. He swallowed that quietly. He thought back to the last time he'd seen Elise in that apartment. 2 years ago. She'd stood in the doorway, her hair pulled up into a bun, oversized sweatshirt falling to mid-thigh, and told him she wanted to keep the place for creative space. Something about painting again, light from the west-facing windows. He hadn't argued. It was her place before they married, and he figured everyone needs a corner of the world that's just theirs. He never thought to ask if someone else would share that corner. Tran handed him a business card. "You're free to go. We'll reach out if we need a formal statement." On his way out, Graham stopped briefly in the main lobby, just to breathe. The building's glass front gave a clear view of the slick street outside, headlights of passing cars refracted like bent memories. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his assistant reminding him about tomorrow's budget meeting. It felt absurd. Instead of heading straight home, he walked 2 blocks to Mulberry's. The cafe had been around for 20 years, tucked beside a bookstore and a dry cleaner that closed at 5. Graham had come here for a decade, mostly for their cappuccino, always tipping a flat $5 no matter the size of the bill. Small rituals made life feel stable. The barista, a soft-spoken man in his late 20s, nodded in recognition. "Cappuccino tonight, Mr. Ellison?" Graham offered a faint smile. "Yeah. Make it a double." The place smelled of espresso beans and rain-soaked wool. A soft Ella Fitzgerald tune played overhead, something about lost time and second chances. He took his cup to a booth near the back, where he could watch the window but not be seen easily. He stirred the foam slowly, trying to make sense of what he knew, and what he didn't. Elise was in that apartment. With a man. A dead man. There had been signs, he thought now. The weekend workshops. The late returns from fundraisers. The sudden interest in photography magazines. She had mentioned a boss once, Daniel Rowe. Had Elise gone back to working with him? Or was this Nick Brennan another connection entirely? He rubbed his temple. There were too many frayed ends. Graham finished his drink and left cash on the table, $10 this time, no reason why. The rain had stopped when he stepped outside, but the sidewalk still gleamed with reflection. His phone buzzed again. This time, an email. No subject. No sender name. The body of the message was just one line. "Check the safe." He stood still for a moment, phone still in hand, then slowly pocketed it. The drive home was quiet. Portland's streets were winding down, traffic thinning as the city slid into its slower rhythm. Street lamps flickered over wet pavement, casting gold halos on the windshield. Graham's mind ticked like a metronome, "Check the safe, check the safe." The house was dark when he arrived. Elise's car was still impounded. The front door creaked as he stepped inside, and the familiar smell of cedar and lemon polish met him. He hadn't changed the living room layout in 5 years. Elise liked consistency in decor, even if not in other areas, apparently. He went straight to the study. The safe was built into the floor, hidden beneath the rug and a loose floorboard behind his desk. It wasn't high-tech, just a solid mechanical dial and a heavy door. Only he and Elise knew the combination. He turned the dial slowly. 32. 7. 18. Click. Inside were documents, birth certificates, insurance papers, and the small black case where he kept the Smith & Wesson .38 he'd inherited from his grandfather. Except it wasn't there. The black case sat open, empty. His hand rested on the edge of the safe for a long moment. His pulse echoed in his ears, louder than the wind outside, louder than the rain that had just started falling again, whispering against the windows like a memory repeating itself. The gun was gone. And now, so was the certainty he had in Elise. The safe was empty. My gun was gone. And Elise never had the code. Graham sat on the edge of his leather desk chair, staring into the dark mouth of the floor safe. The black foam cutout that had once held the .38 revolver now cradled nothing but silence. It didn't make sense. He had changed the combination himself after Elise had misplaced the gold locket his mother had left him, a small thing, but enough to shake his sense of privacy. She hadn't known the new code. He was sure of it. He stood, rubbed the back of his neck, and paced slowly across the room, each footstep softened by the old Persian rug. The rain outside had grown heavier, punctuated by low rumbles of thunder rolling in from the west. Somewhere past the stillness of the house, past the weight of damp air and confusion, something had shifted. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was something else. He opened his laptop and pulled up the calendar. 3 weeks ago, he'd been at a financial summit in Chicago for 4 days. Elise hadn't gone with him, she'd claimed to be visiting her aunt in Eugene. That would have been the window. His hand trembled slightly as he closed the safe and reset the combination again, adding 2 new digits this time. If someone had known how to bypass it once, he wasn't taking the same risk again. By late morning, the storm had passed, though clouds still hung low over Lake Oswego. Graham drove into the city, keeping his windows cracked just enough for the chill to bite. He needed answers, and there was only one place to start, someone who knew Elise better than he did, perhaps even better than Elise admitted to herself. Lydia Cross had been Elise's college roommate and occasional collaborator on photography projects. Graham remembered her vaguely from gallery openings, always in dark blazers and with a quiet voice that left stronger impressions than loud ones. He found her in the back office of a print studio on Burnside. The place smelled of fresh ink and brewed tea. She looked up from a contact sheet and blinked in surprise. "Graham?" Her voice was cautious but not unkind. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. She nodded and gestured toward a folding chair opposite her desk. "I heard about Nick Brennan," she said after a beat. "The news is everywhere." "I didn't come here about the news," Graham replied. "I came because I think Elise is in more trouble than I understand." Lydia's shoulders dropped slightly, and she reached for her tea. "She told me once," Lydia began slowly, "that Nick used to show up uninvited. He'd call her at strange hours, offer to take her out to shoot on location. She said no, always, but he didn't stop. I told her to report it, but she thought it'd make things worse." Graham nodded. "Did she ever mention Daniel Rowe?" At that, Lydia looked away, out the small window that overlooked a brick wall. They worked together at the agency downtown. He helped her get back into freelance gigs after the slowdown. But he could be possessive. Possessive how? The kind of man who doesn't like being told no, especially by women. She said once that he reminded her of someone her father used to know, charming, but always with a string attached. Graham thanked her and stepped outside, the air now smelling of wet asphalt and fir trees. If what Lydia said was true, then Elise had been navigating something far more dangerous than a simple affair. On a hunch, Graham headed toward the studio where Elise used to rent space for shoots, a second-story loft in an aging building downtown, across from a shuttered theater. It had been nearly empty since the pandemic, but the receptionist still recognized Elise's name. "She hasn't been in much lately," the young woman said. "But we've still got her keycard on file. Want me to pull up logs?" Graham hesitated. "Actually, would there be security footage from last week?" She hesitated. "We only store 10 days. But I can check." 10 minutes later, she returned with a thumb drive and an apologetic smile. "It's from 3 nights ago. Someone used her code to enter at 9:42 p.m. I didn't watch it, but it's all on here." Back in his car, Graham plugged the USB into the dash screen. The footage was grainy but serviceable. Elise entered the studio alone, her long coat flapping in the wind. A few minutes later, Nick Brennan arrived. They spoke. Graham couldn't hear, but Elise looked tense, her arms folded across her chest. Then came the moment that made his breath catch. Outside the wide front window, mostly hidden by shadow, a third figure stood. Only half visible. Tall. Watching. And even from the silhouette, Graham was certain it was Daniel Rowe. He paused the video, his finger hovering over the screen. Daniel. Elise had always said he was just supportive. A mentor. Nothing more. He opened his phone and dialed the number from Daniel's business card, one Elise had once left near the phone for emergencies. "Rowe and Partners, Geneva office," the voice on the other end chirped. "How may I help you?" "I need to speak with Mr. Rowe." "I'm sorry," the assistant replied. "Mr. Rowe is currently in meetings and won't be available until the 17th. Graham looked at the date on the dashboard, November 15th. "That's in 2 days." "Yes, sir. He's currently abroad and unavailable." Of course he was. Graham ended the call without another word and leaned back in his seat. The world outside had dimmed again, rain starting once more in a soft, persistent rhythm. He didn't go home immediately. Instead, he took the long route through the hills, past the restaurant where he and Elise had celebrated their 5th anniversary. Cedar Grove, all pine paneling and candlelight, the kind of place with servers who remembered your name. That night had been laughter and red wine. He remembered thinking she looked more at ease than she had in months. He'd believed her, then. By the time he pulled into the driveway, a small box sat by the front door. No label. No postage. Just a thin silver ribbon across the top. Inside, nestled in black felt, was another USB drive. The folder was labeled row_proof_1219. It shouldn't have existed. Graham stared at the screen of the library computer, hands hovering above the keyboard as if reluctant to touch what might burn. He'd waited until evening, when the Lake Oswego Public Library was quiet, lit by warm overhead bulbs and the gentle rustle of newspapers and pages. A woman 2 chairs over flipped through the New York Times. The scent of rain on coats and dusty spines hung in the air. He'd used a guest login. No names. No links to him. The USB drive, now plugged into the side of the old terminal, pulsed with a faint red light. He double-clicked the folder. Inside were 3 subfolders: images, audio, video. He started with the images. The first was a snapshot of a conference room, Daniel Rowe seated at the head of a long table, gesturing with his hand mid-sentence. Graham was there too, standing with arms crossed in the background, blurred but recognizable. Another image showed Elise and Nick Brennan in what looked like a hotel bar, heads tilted toward each other, drinks untouched. His stomach tightened. The next image was worse. A whiteboard. Financial schematics. His own handwriting. This was from 3 years ago, when Graham had raised questions about a missing ledger from the charity portfolio Daniel had overseen. He'd compiled a report. Met with compliance. The evidence had disappeared shortly afterward. The official narrative pinned it on a data corruption issue. But here it was, a photo of the board, intact, dated December 19th. His mouth went dry. That was why the folder name felt so familiar. Row_proof_1219. It had all been kept. By someone. He moved to the audio folder. The first clip began with a familiar voice, Daniel's, clear and confident. "She trusts you," Daniel said, "but we need her to start questioning that. Just nudge her a little. Make her think he's distant. Controlling. She's already halfway there." A pause, then Nick's voice, "You want her to break him?" "She won't even realize she's doing it," Daniel replied. "That's the beauty of it." Graham sat back, mind racing. The second file was shorter. "We'll bring Graham down, through her." That voice was unmistakable. It wasn't just corporate sabotage. It was personal. He clicked on the video folder last. The thumbnail showed Elise, sitting on the edge of a bed, her face barely lit. Her hair was tied back, and she wore a hoodie Graham vaguely remembered from her college days. She was crying. "I thought, you said he was cold," she whispered. "You said he wouldn't notice. But he still brings me tea when I can't sleep. He still makes space on his side of the closet even when I fill it with junk. That's not nothing." She rubbed her eyes, looking exhausted. "I don't think he's who you said he is." Graham's hand clenched around the edge of the desk. The footage ended abruptly. The clip had no date or timestamp. Just the label EL_night 2. He sat in silence for a long while. The fan on the computer whirred gently. The older man across from him coughed once, adjusted his reading glasses, and returned to his crossword. Graham's mind replayed the words. "We'll bring Graham down, through her." Elise hadn't known. Not fully. That didn't absolve her, not entirely. But it shifted something inside him. She'd been manipulated too, caught in a net spun by a man who knew exactly how to make puppets dance. And now, someone wanted Graham to see it. He looked back to the USB, wondering who had sent it. Lydia? A remorseful employee at Daniel's firm? Elise herself? There was no note. No sender. Only the truth. He shut down the computer, ejected the USB, and slipped it into the inner pocket of his coat. As he stood, he gave a polite nod to the librarian behind the desk, a young woman with gray-streaked hair and a pumpkin-shaped pin on her cardigan. Outside, the rain had picked up again, softly blurring the orange glow of the street lamps. The town was winding down for the night. He could hear faint music from a diner a block away, something old, maybe Patsy Cline. A man was walking a golden retriever in a yellow raincoat. A couple ducked into the back of a rideshare, laughing. For a second, Graham longed for normalcy. For the life he used to have, quiet dinners, folding laundry while the news played in the background, Elise humming while she painted. He walked to the edge of the library parking lot and paused. Something shifted in his peripheral vision. Across the street, a black SUV slowed to a crawl. Its windows were tinted. The engine nearly silent. But Graham recognized the shape. The model. Even the faint scuff on the front fender. Daniel's car. The SUV didn't stop. It simply rolled past, almost politely, before disappearing down a side street. Graham stood in the rain, unmoving, the USB warm in his pocket. "You weren't supposed to see that," the voice behind me said. I froze. The air in the library parking lot was still damp from the drizzle earlier. Faint reflections of sodium streetlights glimmered off the pavement. I turned slowly, heart thudding, and came face to face with a woman wearing a scuffed leather jacket, her expression unreadable. She looked to be in her early 40s, with tightly pulled back hair and the kind of calm that comes from either complete control or complete exhaustion. "You're Graham Ellison," she said, more like a confirmation than a question. "I am," I replied cautiously, eyeing the SUV parked a few spaces down. "And you are?" "Claire Holloway. I used to work for Daniel Rowe." Her name meant nothing to me at first. But the moment she said Daniel, the pieces started shifting again. She gestured toward a nearby diner just off the main road, Harvest Grill, with neon letters half-lit and an exterior that hadn't been updated since the Carter administration. Inside, the place smelled of coffee, hash browns, and worn vinyl. A waitress in her 60s approached our booth and poured coffee without asking. "Refill?" she asked as if muscle memory took over before any thought. Claire waited until the waitress was out of earshot. "I saw the SUV outside the library," she said. "That was Daniel's man, or at least one of them. I didn't want him to catch you alone." I folded my hands together, trying to suppress the frustration boiling in my chest. Why am I being followed? Why did my wife end up in handcuffs with a dead man in her old apartment? And why are you helping me? Claire looked at me with tired eyes. Because I've seen this before. I was Daniel's assistant for 4 years. I used to be the one who ran his favors. Once, there was a woman, Katie Blanton. Daniel played the same game with her. Gaslit her, got her into a relationship, then used her to destroy her husband's political career. I tried to focus. Are you saying Elise is being used? She already was, Claire said quietly. Daniel has a pattern. He seduces, manipulates, and leverages women, emotionally, financially, whatever it takes. He isolates them, then uses them to ruin someone else. And Elise, she was just another pawn? Claire nodded. But she's deeper in than she knows. You were the target, Graham. Daniel's been after you ever since that internal report you filed. The one about irregularities in the charity fund. I thought that got buried, I said. The files were wiped. No one followed up. Claire's voice dropped. They were wiped because Daniel paid to have them wiped. Elise wasn't involved at first. But then, he made her believe you were controlling. Cold. Unfaithful. He fed her doubts. I sat back, the coffee untouched. My thoughts were loud. Too loud. Elise had always been sensitive to any hint of mistrust. I remembered how she used to recoil when I'd ask about her schedule. How she once accused me of tracking her phone, when I hadn't. Claire reached into her bag and pulled out a small black memory card in a plastic case. I've kept this hidden since last year. There are recordings. Emails. Videos that show how he operates. I never thought I'd use it. But if something happens to me, take this straight to Agent Tran. No one else. She slid the card across the table. I didn't reach for it yet. Why now? Claire looked toward the rain-blurred window. Because he's escalating. And because you're the only one who might still care enough to save Elise before she's beyond saving. The waitress returned. You folks okay? Need anything? Claire smiled gently. Just the check. She left a few minutes later. I stayed behind, sipping cold coffee, eyes on the diner door. I didn't see her get in the SUV. I didn't hear an engine start. When I stepped out into the night to look, the car was gone. I went back to the booth to grab my coat, and noticed the check was still on the table, unpaid. But scribbled on the back in Claire's slanted handwriting were 5 haunting words. He knows I talked to you. The FBI didn't call me back. So I went to them. By 9 the next morning, I stood beneath a sky the color of wet concrete, outside the federal building downtown. Portland had that winter stillness, the kind that settled over your shoulders like a warning. I'd barely slept. The flash of Claire's eyes, the recording of Elise crying, Daniel's voice in that damned file, it all played on repeat. But the thing that stuck with me most wasn't fear, it was resolve. Someone thought I was too clean. Someone wanted to fix that. At reception, I gave them Agent Tran's name and waited. 10 minutes later, I was ushered into a small, windowless room with humming fluorescent lights and a metal table that looked like it hadn't been wiped down since the Bush administration. Agent Tran arrived not long after, followed by a man with steel-gray hair and a no-nonsense posture. He introduced himself as Agent Collins. Tran gave me a nod, professional but not cold. You have something for us, she said, folding her hands on the table. I placed the small flash drive Claire had given me on the surface. This belonged to someone who used to work with Daniel Rowe. She said it might get her killed. Tran's expression didn't change, but Collins leaned forward, picking up the device. Where did you get this? I was followed, I said, steadying my voice. A woman approached me. Her name was Claire Holloway. She used to work under Daniel. She said Elise, my wife, is caught in something bigger. And that I'm next. Tran exchanged a glance with Collins, who gave a small nod. She inserted the drive into a battered old laptop and clicked through the folders. I watched the light from the screen flicker across her face, and for a long moment, there was only the whirring sound of the air vent above us. Then her eyebrows tightened. Play this, she said, and Collins tapped on a file. Daniel's voice poured from the tinny laptop speakers, smooth, calculated, utterly detached. Elise is pliable, but we need to push. Let her believe Graham's distant. Controlling. That will justify her turn. And if it spins out, fine, we'll control the narrative. The room felt colder. Tran clicked to another recording. A second voice, Nix, I thought, argued back, what happens to her when this explodes? Daniel's voice again, she's a pawn. If she breaks, she breaks. Graham's the target. He's the one they'll look at when the financials start to move. I closed my eyes, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. Tran paused the playback and looked at me, the professional mask cracking just enough to show a flicker of anger. I'm sorry, she said softly. You weren't supposed to hear that. Tell me you didn't already know, I said, barely above a whisper. Tran sat back. Daniel Rowe was investigated 5 years ago. A former employee, Maria Cantu, died under strange circumstances. She'd filed a complaint 2 weeks earlier, claimed Rowe had coerced her into fabricating documents for a false audit. A week after that, she was found in her apartment. Officially, it was ruled an accident, sleeping pills and wine, but the details never sat right. Why wasn't he prosecuted? I asked. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses recanted. And Rowe has friends in very high places. Collins shifted, pulling up a final folder. You should see this. It was a video. Grainy. Night vision quality. Daniel sat in a leather chair, whiskey in hand, speaking to a shadowed figure across from him. Graham's too clean, Daniel said. He doesn't lie. Doesn't gamble. Doesn't cheat. We need to make him look desperate. Like a man who'd kill to protect a secret. The file cut off. Tran sat still for a moment, then shut the laptop. Your wife's not the one in danger anymore, she said. You are. The words sank like stones in my chest. She said you'd protect her, I muttered. That you'd understand. Tran nodded, slow and quiet. I believe Elise was manipulated. But even if she started as a pawn, things evolve. She may not be playing by their rules anymore. She refused a lawyer, I said. Said I'd understand. Which might be her way of telling you something without putting it on record. Tran folded her hands again. But now that we know Daniel's pattern, if we can link this with Maria's case, we might finally bring him down. I leaned back, mind racing. So what happens next? We build the timeline. And we protect you. She hesitated, then added, Claire was right to tell you not to trust anyone. This case has been buried twice already. If someone like Daniel thinks you're close, he won't hesitate. I thought about Claire's warning. Her eyes scanning the diner. The unpaid bill and that note. He knows I talked to you. Where's Claire now? Collins asked. I don't know, I said. Her car was gone when I came out. Tran gave me a long look. If she reaches out again, no heroics. Call us. The session wrapped up with paperwork and a quick fingerprint verification. By the time I stepped back into the Oregon air, the sky had begun to clear. Sunlight pierced through a crack in the clouds, casting a faint gold over the government stone building. My breath came out in a long stream, like I hadn't exhaled properly since the USB arrived. I crossed the street to where my car was parked, trying to organize the chaos in my head. My wife. Her boss. The FBI. And now me, sitting in the crosshairs. Back in the driver's seat, I let the engine idle. The radio played faint jazz, something by Chet Baker. Smooth. Melancholy. A few blocks away, kids were walking home from school, backpacks bouncing. The world moved like nothing had changed. But everything had. Elise's art was never about truth. Until now. The doorway to Lumiere creaked with the kind of resistance that reminded Graham of days long gone, the kind of sound that echoed old habits and forgotten memories. As he stepped into the softly lit gallery, the smell of linseed oil and aged wood mingled in the air like a whisper from the past. Outside, the faint sounds of fiddles and laughter from the autumn fair danced through the cracks of the gallery door, clashing gently with the silence inside. Bonnie, the gallery owner, stood behind the reception desk, flipping through an old binder. Her glasses rested low on her nose, and her hair was tucked into a loose bun, streaked with more silver than Graham remembered. She looked up as he approached. "Didn't expect to see you here," she said, eyes narrowing with cautious warmth. "Thought Elise said you weren't the gallery type." She wasn't wrong, Graham murmured. But things change. Bonnie gestured toward the left side of the gallery. "She sent some new pieces. Just last week. No real explanation, no exhibit planned. I figured she was trying to tell someone something." Graham followed the path laid out by small spotlights along the polished floor. Photographs hung along the walls, each framed in Elise's signature minimalist style, black wood, clean lines, no titles. One photo caught his eye almost immediately. It was black and white, stark in contrast, showing a narrow hallway bathed in a sliver of light. If he squinted, he could see himself reflected faintly in a mirror at the end of that hallway. But it wasn't just the reflection. Graham leaned closer. Just beneath the bottom right corner of the frame, barely etched into the print's matte finish, was a line of text. "It was never about you. It was always about what he had on me." His throat dried. Elise had never been cryptic in her work. Personal, sure. Introspective, yes. But never like this. "She wanted this scene," he said aloud. Bonnie's voice came from behind him. "There's more. Her student, Theo, he's been coming by to check on the exhibit. Says she left him a message for you." Theo appeared moments later from a side hallway, a tall, soft-spoken young man in his 20s with paint on his jeans and the kind of eyes that saw more than they said. He approached Graham with something like reverence. "She told me," Theo said quietly, "that if something ever happened, and you came here, I was to tell you about the workshop on Forest Street." Graham turned fully toward him. "What workshop?" "She used it sometimes when she needed space. Said it was safer than home. Said she hid things there." The information churned in Graham's mind. Between the USB Claire had given him, the files Agent Tran reviewed, and now this, Elise wasn't just involved. She was trying to resist, in the only way she could. He turned back to the wall. Another photograph, darker this time, showed the corner of a desk, a single tulip in a glass bottle, and what looked like a torn notebook page. In the corner of the frame, barely visible, were 3 tiny letters, etched into the wooden edge itself. D.R.H. Daniel Rowe Holdings. He stepped back, heart pounding. A quiet fury began to settle in his chest, not the blinding kind, but the sort that crept up on you with cold hands. He thanked Theo and Bonnie with a nod, pulling his phone from his coat pocket to call a rideshare. As the app confirmed a driver nearby, Graham stepped outside into the cool October evening. The autumn fair in the distance painted the streets in soft amber glows and carnival echoes, the scent of roasted nuts and cinnamon drifting on the breeze. The car pulled up, a black SUV, sleek and quiet. Graham hesitated. Something felt off. The driver didn't roll down the window. Didn't wave. Then Graham saw it, the same angular jaw, the same dark jacket. The same man he'd seen weeks earlier at the library, watching from behind a parked sedan. He didn't move toward the vehicle. Instead, he slowly stepped back toward the door of the gallery. But the SUV didn't follow. It simply pulled away, slow, deliberate, as if delivering a warning. And Graham understood. He wasn't chasing shadows anymore. The shadows were circling him. I wasn't sure what I'd find in Elise's old studio. I just knew I had to go alone. The road to Forest Street curled like an old ribbon, lined with trees in full autumn bloom. Golden leaves skittered across Graham's windshield as he drove, the late afternoon sun casting a warm hue over the world, as if trying to soften what he might uncover. The GPS flickered briefly, then announced the destination. He pulled into a gravel lot beside the faded brick building Elise once called her quiet place. The studio looked forgotten by time, red bricks dulled with dust, tall windows cracked or yellowed with age, and ivy curling up the corners. He hesitated before pushing the door open. It groaned, just like the gallery door had. But this time, the sound carried more weight. Inside, dust floated in beams of slanted light, and a faint scent of linseed oil, charcoal, and something older, something like memory, clung to the air. Graham let his fingers trail along an abandoned easel, its wooden legs scarred with use. On a far table, a glass jar still held broken brushes. Near the back wall was an old metal cabinet, rust flecking its handle. He crossed the studio slowly, each step muffled by a layer of dust and paper. He opened the cabinet. Inside was a locked metal box. The key was taped underneath the drawer. When he turned it, the lock clicked with a dry snap. The lid creaked open. Stacks of papers, some faded, some pristine. Contracts, receipts, handwritten notes. At the very bottom, a bundle of letters tied with fraying twine. The top one had Elise's handwriting. Familiar and aching. Graham. If you're reading this, it means you never stopped believing there was more. The letters told a quiet, painful story. About Daniel. About the pressure he applied. About a contract with an overseas firm, a transfer of money Elise had never agreed to, but her name was signed on. Daniel had used her trust, her need for approval, and her past to manipulate her into silence. Graham read each word slowly, carefully. His chest tightened. Elise hadn't been just a bystander. She'd been trapped. Complicit, yes, but in ways she hadn't known how to escape. He was still holding the last letter when a faint scuffle echoed from behind. He turned sharply. A man stepped out from the shadows near the door, lean, in a weathered jacket, eyes sharp with knowledge too old for his face. "Name's Marcus," the man said quietly. "Used to be in Daniel's IT team." Graham didn't move. "You followed me?" "No," Marcus said. "I've been watching the place. Waiting. Hoping someone would come who wasn't already bought." Graham narrowed his eyes. "What do you want?" "To warn you," Marcus said. He glanced around the studio before stepping closer. "Whatever you think you know about Daniel, it's worse. Much worse. He doesn't care who he ruins, as long as it keeps him clean. I already know he's behind most of this." Marcus shook his head. "He doesn't see you as collateral. He sees you as threat number one. Elise, she tried to pull away. She made plans. But he had something on her." Graham's stomach sank. "What?" "Photos. From years ago. Before she turned 18. A party, some bad choices, and Daniel's people got hold of them. He's been using them to control her since." Graham felt like the floor tilted. Elise had once told him there were parts of her past she couldn't talk about. He'd respected that. Now he wondered how much silence had been forced. "Why are you telling me this?" Graham asked. "Because I tried to leave once too," Marcus said. "Thought I could just walk away. The next morning, my wife lost her job, and my bank account was flagged for fraud. I know what Daniel can do. But you might still have time." Graham stared at the man. Dust swirled between them in the dying light. Outside, the countryside was unnervingly still. Get these files to someone who matters, Marcus added. Someone outside Daniel's reach. But be careful. He'll know you're coming before you do. With that, Marcus stepped back, then disappeared through the door. Graham stood alone again, heart racing, thoughts spiraling. He looked back at the cabinet. One of Elise's drawings was stuck behind a file, a sketch of this very studio, with her curled in a corner, pencil in hand. A soft smile touched his lips, brief and sad. He gathered the documents, wrapped them tightly, and stepped outside into the orange hue of twilight. Then he froze. His car was gone. The gravel lot, once familiar, now looked foreign. A single tire track led away down the winding road. Graham scanned the horizon. Empty. Silent. And somewhere, just beyond the trees, a crow called once, then stopped. You think this ends with you? He asked. Daniel doesn't lose. Rain speckled the cracked sidewalk as Graham walked the final block toward the small police station on Alder Street. His shoes were damp. So was the folder tucked under his coat, Elise's documents wrapped in plastic, as if that alone could shield them from everything they were up against. He hadn't slept, not really. His mind had played back every word Marcus had said, every image from the studio, and now, the memory of his missing car lingered like an unfinished sentence. The front desk officer barely looked up as Graham entered. I need to report a stolen vehicle, he said, voice even. The officer tapped a few keys, squinted at the screen, then glanced up, more alert. Name? Graham Ellison. A pause. Then a faint shift in the man's posture. I'm going to have to ask you to wait a moment. He stood and disappeared into the back. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Graham sat on the worn wooden bench by the vending machine, watching a raindrop slide down the glass of the front window like a slow tear. The folder weighed heavy against his side. When the officer returned, he didn't bring paperwork. Sorry, Mr. Ellison, he said. We've been advised not to file anything further under your name without FBI review. It's protocol. Ongoing investigation. Graham stared at him. So someone can steal my car and I just, what? Walk home? I'm just following instructions, the officer replied. Graham stepped out into the drizzle, the chill seeping through his coat. The clouds overhead hung low, gray and unmoving. He crossed the street and sank onto a warped bench in the small park across from the station. Rain pattered softly on the leaves above. A carved name on the bench's backrest caught his eye. Faded. Someone named Claire. He traced it absently with a fingertip. Claire. Then his phone buzzed. Unknown caller. He answered. We found Claire Holloway, Agent Tran's voice came through, low and tight. She's dead. Officially listed as a vehicular accident outside Tillamook. But it was staged. Too clean. No skid marks. Her purse was missing. But her burner phone was recovered. Graham swallowed hard. I need you to know, Tran continued, this is escalating. And you're not a spectator anymore. Daniel's pattern is clearer than ever, but his reach is deeper too. We're trying to contain this. But we'll need more than documents. The line went silent for a second before she added, stay somewhere safe. We'll be in touch. She hung up. The phone buzzed again a moment later. This time, a text. Marcus, he's closing the circle. If you want out, it ends now. But if you want the truth, you'll need her. Elise. Graham stared at the message. Elise. He hadn't said her name aloud in days. And yet, it had never left his mind. Could she still be caught in Daniel's net? Or was she now something else entirely, a variable, a willing participant, or something murkier in between? He looked down at the folder in his lap. The truth was here, numbers, signatures, whispers on paper, but it wasn't enough. Daniel wasn't just a man. He was a system. Clean on the surface, rotten underneath. And like all rot, it spread in silence. Graham stood. He didn't have a car. But he had legs. and he still had a few contacts from his consulting days. He called a name he hadn't said in 5 years, Madeline Hart, an investigative journalist who once did a series on the Monarch Group, the same corporate shell Daniel had used for years. She answered on the third ring. "Graham? It's been a while. I've got something. Something you've probably suspected but couldn't prove. A beat. Where are you? Meet me at Mulberry's. 1 hour." He ended the call, heart thudding not with fear now, but resolve. Claire was dead. Marcus was in hiding. Elise had left him a trail, whether she meant to or not. When he finally returned home, soaked and sore, the house was quiet. The lights blinked softly from the coffee maker. The folder rested on the kitchen counter beside a steaming mug he hadn't made. Someone had been there. Or maybe, had come back. The answering machine blinked. He pressed play. Elise's voice came through, breathy, hushed. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Graham. I never will. But if you still believe there's truth buried somewhere in this mess, meet me tomorrow. Same place we got caught in the rain. 8 p.m. The message ended. Graham stood in the kitchen, rain pooling beneath him, eyes fixed on nothing. He didn't move for a long time. I didn't know what to expect. But her eyes weren't the ones I remembered. The old iron bridge stretched across the dark water like a memory neither of them had quite let go. It was the kind of place you remembered in sepia, rust-colored rails, echoes of laughter caught in the spaces between rivets, and the quiet hum of river currents below. Graham leaned against the metal frame, waiting. She emerged from the shadows like someone returning from another life. Elise. Her frame was thinner, posture different, shoulders squared not out of pride, but as if bracing for something. The dark gray sweater clung to her like armor. Her eyes met his. Worn. Dry. But steady. "It's been a while," she said softly, the wind carrying her voice just enough to reach him. Graham gave a slight nod. "I wasn't sure you'd show." "Neither was I," she admitted. They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the water push against the rocks below. Somewhere upriver, an owl called. She reached into her coat and pulled out something small, a weathered bracelet. He recognized it instantly. Cheap leather, frayed edges. He'd made it for her in college. She held it out. "I kept this," she said. Even when I wasn't sure why. Graham didn't take it. Instead, he looked at her. "Why, Elise?" She tucked the bracelet away, her hands trembling slightly. "Daniel found me at my worst," she began. "I was 23. High, jobless, invisible. He got me clean, gave me a studio, contacts, but everything came with strings. Invisible ones, until it was too late to pull away." Graham's jaw tightened. "He used that to control you." She nodded. "He never forgot what I owed. And he made sure I didn't either. When I met you, I thought I'd escaped him. But after we married, he came back. At first, it was little things, a gallery favor, a photo deal. Then, one day, it was surveillance. Threats. Files I didn't know he had." "Elise," Graham said, voice rougher now, "you let him use you." "Against me." "I did," she whispered. "And I regret every moment I didn't speak up. But you have to know, it wasn't because I stopped loving you. It was because I didn't think I deserved you." She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick envelope, sealed and marked in blue ink. "This is a copy of the original contract. Daniel signed it with a shell corporation out of Luxembourg. Inside are links to accounts, correspondence, and names." Graham took it, his fingers brushing hers. "Why now?" "Because I'm tired of being afraid," she said. "And because you're the only one who never tried to use me, even when you should have." He didn't reply. There was too much between them, years of silence, years of words unsaid. But something in her posture, in the steadiness of her breath, made him believe this was real. A crow cawed from the trees behind them. Graham looked up. Too late. Crack. A single shot echoed through the gorge. Elisa's eyes widened. She turned instinctively and shoved Graham hard, sending him over the side of the bridge's low rail. The cold of the river rushed up to meet him, swallowing the sound of her voice as she whispered, "They've come." Then nothing but water. The USB drive was warm in my pocket. Like it knew what it held could end someone's life. Graham walked into the lobby of the Oregon Tribune, the smell of ink and coffee heavy in the air. The walls were lined with framed headlines from decades past: moon landings, impeachments, protests. Today, it was his turn to make history. Willa Cheng waited near the elevators, her leather notebook pressed to her side. She was younger than Graham expected, maybe early 30s, but her eyes carried that practiced distance of someone who'd seen too much for her age. "You're Graham Ellison?" she asked, extending a hand. He nodded, shaking hers. "I have something you'll want to see. But there's a condition." She raised an eyebrow. "Sources don't usually come with conditions." "Elise. She's not a source. She's collateral damage. You protect her identity, or this never gets published." Willa considered that for a beat. Then nodded. "Let's talk." In a quiet conference room, Graham slid the USB across the table. "You'll find signed contracts, audio clips, financials. It ties Daniel Rowe to international laundering and coercion." She plugged it in, her expression tightening as the files unfolded. "You understand what you're doing, right? This isn't just whistleblowing. It's gasoline on a bonfire." "I know," Graham said. "And I'm ready for the flames." Hours later, the first article went live: "Monarch Ties, Shadow Deals Behind Oregon's Most Powerful Consultant." The headline hit social media like a spark to dry leaves. Daniel responded swiftly. That evening, he appeared on a local news broadcast, tailored and poised. "This is a sad day," he said. "Mr. Ellison is a man clearly struggling with abandonment and paranoia. I've tried to support him through his personal crisis. This," he held up a printed article, "is character assassination." The next morning, Graham walked into the State Finance Committee hearing with a calm born of nothing left to lose. The chamber buzzed with subdued murmurs. TV cameras rotated silently from their posts. People turned to look. Some whispered. At the podium, he spoke simply. "I'm not a hero. I was complicit, if only by silence. But I won't be anymore." He presented the documents, printed and highlighted, laid them flat for the panel. The chairwoman glanced over them, visibly unsettled. Minutes later, Agent Tran entered the back of the hall. She didn't speak, but her presence drew eyes. She gave Graham a small nod. He met her outside after. "We reopened the 2017 investigation," she said quietly. "You've pushed it forward more in 48 hours than we managed in 4 years. And Elise?" he asked. "She'll be offered protection if she cooperates," Tran said. "And if she survives this." At a nearby cafe, a quiet brick-lined shop across from City Hall, Graham waited. People passed by outside, eyes fixed on their phones, murmuring. The barista asked if he wanted another refill. He nodded. When Willa texted, it was a single line: "Watch the live stream." Now. Back in the cafe, all eyes turned to the mounted TV. The live stream from the Tribune's channel had just begun. Willa's voice introduced the piece calmly. "We've obtained a leaked recording from a closed-door strategy meeting, featuring Daniel Rowe." Then came Daniel's voice, crisp and unmistakable. "If I go down, I'm taking all of them with me." The cafe went silent. And Graham finally exhaled. Daniel showed up to court in a tailored suit and that same smug smile. But this time, it cracked. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and floor polish, the kind of place where truth and silence had been arguing for decades. Graham adjusted his tie as he stepped inside, feeling a weight that wasn't quite fear but hovered close, like memory's shadow. The courtroom was full. Not just the expected reporters and lawyers, but people from the community. Neighbors. Retired teachers. A mailman he hadn't seen in 10 years. Some didn't even know him personally, but they came. Because when someone powerful finally stands trial, people want to believe justice isn't just a story we tell ourselves. Daniel sat at the defense table, flanked by two high-priced attorneys. His hair was perfect. His suit, charcoal gray with a blue pocket square, was too polished for the gravity of the charges. He looked like he'd just walked off a corporate brochure. But his eyes twitched at the corners, scanning the gallery with calculated detachment. Graham took the stand. The bailiff swore him in, and the microphone crackled as he leaned forward. He began at the beginning. The call from the FBI. The apartment. The lease in handcuffs. The dead man. The gun. With each detail, he peeled away the narrative Daniel had wrapped around them all. He described the USB, the voice recordings, Claire Holloway's warnings. He recounted Elisa's photo at the gallery, the studio at Forest Street, the documents Daniel never thought would surface. When asked why he was testifying, Graham paused. His eyes drifted briefly to the back of the room, where Willa Ching typed furiously, and then to the corner, where a man with a cane clutched his hat respectfully. Because truth matters, Graham said. Even when it's late. Even when it hurts. And because people like Daniel count on your silence. There was a pause in the room. The judge adjusted his glasses. The prosecutor then played the clip, Elisa's testimony, recorded earlier that morning. Her face filled the monitor. She looked thin, pale, but her voice didn't shake. I thought I owed Daniel everything, she said. He paid for rehab. He helped me back on my feet. But it wasn't help. It was a leash. He knew what I'd done, who I'd been. And he used it. She paused. Tears welled but didn't fall. I stayed quiet out of fear. I helped him, once, because I thought I had no choice. But Graham never gave up on me. And today, I'm choosing to be free. The courtroom stayed silent after the video ended. Even Daniel didn't move. Then came the final blow, a recording left behind by Claire, introduced as newly admitted evidence. It was her voice, soft but steady, speaking into what sounded like an old cassette mic. If you're hearing this, I'm gone. And if Daniel's still out there, he'll spin everything. He always does. But listen carefully. He used Elise. He used me. He's done it before. And he'll do it again. Her voice trembled, just once, then steadied. Don't let him. Daniel's lawyer objected, relevance, timing, hearsay, but the judge allowed it. The jury, now visibly rattled, shifted in their seats. Daniel's smile had long since vanished. Still, the system moves slowly. By the end of the day, the judge granted Daniel bail, citing the absence of a prior conviction, but acknowledging the severity of the charges. He was to remain within the state, under surveillance, pending federal proceedings. As people filed out, a small elderly woman stood and clapped once, soft, but audible. Then again. Others followed, hesitant at first. The moment didn't last long, but it was enough. A small, weathered salute to one man choosing to speak when it would have been easier to disappear. Graham walked through the parking lot alone. The clouds hung low, almost metallic. A light wind pushed leaves across the asphalt in quiet circles. He stopped when he saw it, the black SUV, parked just across from his car. Daniel leaned against it, arms crossed, no longer wearing that courtroom polish. For a brief moment, their eyes met. And then, Daniel smiled. Not the arrogant grin from the courtroom, nor the media smile he wore on television. This one was thinner. Controlled. Almost satisfied. And then he stepped into the SUV. It pulled away silently, disappearing around the corner. 3 months later, a letter arrived. No return address. Just my name. Graham found it tucked between the day's grocery flyers and a local theater bulletin. The envelope was off-white, the kind that felt thicker than necessary, and on the front was his name, just Graham Ellison, no street number, no city. but it had made it to his mailbox in Ashland all the same. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen curtains as he turned the envelope over in his hands. Outside, the cherry trees lining the street rustled in the October breeze. The air smelled like cold stone and early frost. He made coffee, 2 sugars, just as always, and let the envelope rest on the counter beside a blueberry tart from Mrs. Lindstrom, his neighbor 2 houses down. She baked on Tuesdays and believed Graham used to teach literature, despite his polite corrections. When he finally opened the envelope, the handwriting was unmistakable. Neat, slightly leaning, and familiar in a way that tightened his chest. Dear Graham, I'm writing this because silence feels like cruelty, and I've lived with too much of that. I won't ask you to forgive me, or to believe in what's already broken. But if you ever wondered whether I truly loved you, the answer is yes. I just didn't have the courage to live inside that love. Daniel had something on me from a long time ago. I let it shape my choices. That wasn't your burden to carry, but I made it yours. You deserved better. You still do. I hope you find peace, the kind I could never give you. Elise. Graham read it twice. The second time slower. He folded the letter back along its crease and set it inside an old hardcover book that now served more as decoration than reading. Then he took his coffee out to the small porch and watched as 2 boys raced their scooters down the sidewalk, their laughter loud in the morning stillness. Across the street, Mrs. Lindstrom was watering her gardenia plant with a plastic pitcher. She waved. He waved back. Later that day, the Oregon Tribune published Willa Cheng's final piece on the case. The headline was calm, factual: Daniel Rowe captured at Bogota Airport, awaiting U.S. extradition. The article outlined the timeline of events, carefully omitting Elise's involvement. Willa had kept her promise. In the quiet of the afternoon, Graham walked into town. The streets of Ashland had a theater-town charm: slate sidewalks, iron benches, shop fronts with hand-lettered signs. He passed the summer festival posters being swapped out for autumn recital flyers. A woman in her 40s passed by with a canvas tote and smiled as she held the door to a corner cafe. Inside, the chalkboard read, "Cash only. Smiles always accepted." He ordered a black coffee and sat near the window. The barista, a red-haired young man with wireframe glasses, brought it over and said, "Here you go, Professor." Graham blinked. "Oh, I'm not." But the young man was already gone, tending to another customer. Graham smiled, softly, and let it go. He wandered through Lithia Park later that afternoon. A group of schoolchildren sat in a loose circle on the grass, sketchbooks open on their laps, pencils dancing. Their teacher, a wiry man in a felt hat, stood nearby, guiding them gently. One girl, maybe 7, walked up to him. "Mister," she asked. He turned. "I drew you." She held up a small page torn from her pad. Graham looked at it. It was a charcoal sketch, rough but kind. He stood beneath a tree, hands in his coat pockets, a gentle curve to his mouth. He looked, impossibly, like someone who had found peace. "Thank you," he whispered. She grinned and ran back to the group. He stayed there a moment longer, letting the scene imprint itself into memory. Then he walked home, the letter from Elise still folded between the pages of that book on the shelf. He didn't need to respond. She wasn't asking him to. That night, as the porch light clicked on automatically, Graham sat outside again with a blanket around his shoulders. The street was quiet. The wind had calmed. He thought about everything: the lies, the unraveling, the betrayals and late-night whispers, the pieces of his life that had been pried apart. And yet, somehow, what he felt now was not anger. Just clarity. "I don't need forgiveness," he murmured to himself, watching the stars slip quietly into place. "I just need to live. For real, this time." Sometimes healing doesn't come with a grand victory, but with the quiet act of waking up without dread. Graham didn't need justice to be loud, he just needed it to be real. And when it finally arrived, it wore the face of peace, not triumph. We are not defined by who leaves us, but by who we choose to become after they do. Betrayal can bruise the soul, but it can also break the shell we've outgrown. In the end, dignity isn't a verdict, it's how we carry ourselves when no one's watching. Like a porch light left on in the rain, a small, steady kindness can guide us through even the darkest turns. So take a moment today. Look around at the quiet grace in your life, a neighbor's wave, a handwritten note, a child's drawing left behind. And if this story touched your heart, consider sharing a little warmth with someone who's still searching for theirs. Because sometimes, the simplest act, believing in your own worth, is what sets you free.